Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched The Menu from 2022. Now, this is a film that I am going to have trouble talking about without spoiling tone and content, so I'm going to try and keep it towards the end with that stuff. It is, I think, a pretty darn good film. Genre-wise, it's a mix of a couple of different things. A combination sort of character study and sort of dark comedy, and with some horror thriller aspects thrown in too. It's a nice mix of different genres, but in some rethought ways that I will get into a little bit later. As far as the actual tone of the film goes, I think it would be hard to nail down. And if I was going to, oh man, how do I talk about this without talking about it? If I was going to recommend for or against it based on its content, I would say if you're in for a dark comedy, then you'll probably be fine. The style and all of the visual content on screen is really excellent. The extent of the film, the locations, and the space in which the movie exists are fairly limited, to the point that this could have pretty reasonably been adapted to be a single stage play with like a single set, without too much additional adaptation. I think this really serves in with the design, the rest of the design of what's there, to set a really good, intimate tone for the movie as it presents itself. You get intimately familiar with the location and its ins and outs, and what different things about the environment mean. Whereas a lot of movies, you are going scene to scene in different locations. In this is much more like a theater piece where the set itself is very much one of the actors. And I think while it definitely has some uniquely cinematic takes on how it is shot and presented, the use of the set as a character, the location as a character, and as an environment of both a character and an environmental influence on the rest of the goings on, is something that you don't see all that often in cinema, and I think is of particular note. The cast is really excellent. It's a lot of somewhat well-known to pretty well-known actors. At this point, we've watched like 4 or 5 movies now with Anya Taylor-Joy. She is really excellent. Ralph Fiennes, I always enjoy his performances. He has a wide variety of performance ability under his belt, and I think this movie brings out some unique things I haven't seen him do before, but fully believe that he was capable of. Nicholas Hoult is, I don't know him that well. I've not always been the biggest fan, but I think he does a really solid job of playing the character he's supposed to play in this setting. And all of the other characters, who are generally a little bit more minor, play their parts admirably, really setting in a pretty short amount of time and in very limited context who they are, what they're about, why they act the way they act, and establishing visible relationships between either pre-existing or relationships as they evolve on screen. And I really have nobody that I can think of that I didn't think did an excellent job in the acting. That, of course, is also reliant on a really strong script, and this does have a pretty darn strong script. It's not perfect. There are some moments that I think slip away into a little bit of writing self-indulgence, and a few that are just not quite as tight and not quite as succinct as they might possibly be. But it's not really to the detriment of the movie as a whole. It's more that this movie is so bare in terms of its content, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean in terms of like it is very sparing with what it gives you. That any imprecision is a little bit more noticeable. However, I think, like I said, the actors with this script, I think, do an excellent job of evoking a lot of emotions in the viewers and setting the exact right emotional tone overall. The sound is a mixed bag. I actually think it is very, very good. However, in the edit, there are some problems. Of particular note, the very first scene of the movie seems to have the music mixed way too high, and it was very noticeable. I watched it on HBO Max, so it's possible that could be a quirk of the streaming service itself, but who knows? The rest of it was not particularly, it was not quite as noticeable if something was really bad in the mix. Just some little moments here where I was like, well, I wish the music swelled a little more here. It's definitely there, and like the composition is really good. So that, along with a relatively sparing soundscape, and a very meaningful soundscape in the like environmental sound design, means that again has to be really precise. And minus a few issues here and there, it's pretty good. But I think it's all the more noticeable because it is, like I said, a fairly bare thing to as it's presented in the first place. In addition to the environment, I think the sets or rather the costumes and the makeup are done very well. Again, it is in a very limited capacity. The whole thing is over a very short period of time, a very limited number of actors, not actor, well, you know what I mean. There's not a lot of people going about, and what everybody looks like and what they're wearing makes a big difference. And there's a lot of environmental storytelling that comes off of the clothes that people wear, that give hints to things, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle, just depending on how much you pick up on, from the very, very beginning of the film. I think there are a few elements here and there that I can't help but look at this from a theatrical eye and say that if I was putting this on a stage, I would amp certain things up a little bit more to make them visually distinctive. And I think there's an aspect of the cinematography that does downplay some of the visual elements generally. That there are certain color choices and things I might have liked to be a little bit different, but I'm really finding nitpicks to go after at this point. I think overall the visuals are very, very good, and the cinematography and the shooting, as I was already getting into, are generally very, very tight. There are a few times when I wish the camera had spent a little bit more time lingering, a few less reverse shots, a few less dolly shots, a few less pans where I just wish it had been a wide or something like that. But as far as use of close-up inserts and getting a good idea of the space and the players using a camera in a relatively small space, I think it is pretty impressive what has been done here. I'm not really familiar with the director, Mark Mylod. I don't. I'm maybe mispronouncing that. I guess he's been a producer for, or director and producer of a couple of TV shows before this. I think this may be his first feature. I didn't completely check his list of credits, but I'm generally pretty impressed with what he's done here, and the design and the cinematography that goes into the presentation here. Like I said, there's a little bit about like the lighting and color grading sometimes that I think is appropriate for the environment in a very literal sense, but maybe it does a little bit it does it a bit of a disservice artistically in terms of letting you see letting you see what's going on. This is a much subtler version of a complaint I often have about color grading being very usually brown and gray, a lot of very muted and very filtered visuals. And while the environmental lighting makes sense, I think the use of a bit more unreal lighting would have done it some good. In fact, there are a few scenes where there's some very like absurd, like sort of comedic, almost comedic, and like definitely unreal use of lighting and color that I think does a lot to highlight some of the narrative, some of the absurdity of people's actions, and some of the emotions that are going on that are less textual and more in the subtext. And so there's a few more places I would have liked to see that kind of work being done. But generally overall, I'm really very happy with a lot of the production. I don't think I can talk about this much more without spoiling it, at least in tone, if not in actual content. Talking about the characters and talking about the location is hard to do without starting to spoil the content. I think this is a really strong film with a few ups and downs here and there. And if you haven't watched it already and it does sound like something that's up your alley, I would recommend you go watch it and then come back to this video after you've watched it. Because I don't think I think it's the kind of thing that could be very sensitive to influence when it comes to talking about its tone and its themes and what it's really about. So I'll give you a moment and you can come back when you're ready. Okay, so getting into the actual content of the film, the movie frames itself from the very beginning as sort of a thriller, horror, dark comedy thing, but has a lot of sort of ups and downs that can make you a little unsure of where it's going in terms of its genre. This is interesting to me because it keeps a very a pretty consistent tone overall. I don't want to say very, because there are some ups and downs. From the very first scene, we get a very strong sense of unease and a sense of place and economics and character that establishes who we're looking at as far as all the characters go. The very first scene being boarding a boat to go to a private island to a very exclusive restaurant is already establishing a lot of baselines for what is to be expected in terms of the tone. And when we have Anya Taylor-Joy, who is clearly from one of the very first lines, framed as a character who is out of place, it sets a tone for basically the framing of the entire film, as well as some of its key themes about who belongs and who doesn't, and who takes and who gives, and what people are like or can be like if left to their own devices or left to be influenced by a society around them or a portion of society without anyone sort of checking in and trying to ground them back where they are. I think the sense of unease permeates the film pretty consistently up until maybe the 2/3 mark. And it goes up and down on a lot of other things. In the first, establishing section, the first 20 minutes or so, there are more than a couple of lines that are supposed to be very sort of darkly humorous, not laugh out loud funny, and generally not the kind of thing that you're not gonna laugh at without a little bit of a grimace, but it definitely wants you to know that it's supposed to be satirical, that it's supposed to be kind of absurd. And I think that is really important, because without some of that to lighten the mood, it would pretty quickly fall to being sort of dour and seeming much more like a sort of horror, a very more classic modern horror film than something that has a substantial commentary and that has characters with agency. One of the hallmarks of a lot of horror is that things seem to happen to the characters much more than when they have than other film genres, where agency is the acts of horror are generally taken when characters lack agency, or have their agency taken away from them. This movie turns a lot of those things on its head in terms of saying some of these characters are exactly who you think they are, but we're recontextualizing what that person is like, both in the context of their own world, who they are, what they expect, how they behave, but also in a literary horror way of saying these are characters who would be used in a particular, who some of them are used as they often would be. Others are used in a way that they are sort of they end up being the opposite. They end up having more agency or more ability to influence the world than normally would be allowed. There are more openings in this film than a regular horror film for characters to take action. And what they do with their opportunities to take action is sort of the crux of the whole movie. What do people believe about themselves? What have they come to believe based on the way the world has reflected back upon them, and what the world has told them, or told them for lack of anyone wanting to be rude. It is a context in which this is a very moneyed, influential, or at least believed to be influential, clientele. And the juxtaposition between the clientele and the kitchen, and with Anya Taylor-Joy really as the the sort of character in between, as this out of place character. The movie really keys in on her, but it also keys in on the other characters. And whereas a lot of horror films would just say this is supposed to be cathartic, you're watching people who people who you recognize from real life, characters, caricatures of people who act a certain way, getting a comeuppance or a having things happen to them that is supposed to be satisfying or at least interesting. This movie goes to really sort of say, what if they have the opportunity to do something, and what happens if they do have that opportunity? Do they actually have, even though they have the literal ability to take more action, what is it about them as a person that either through lack of adaptable thought, or for some other reason, they cannot or will not make better choices? I think it's also, in a lot of ways, a really interesting character study of a couple of different characters, but in particular, Ralph Fiennes and Anya Taylor-Joy's characters, and talking about, in, I don't want to say subtle ways, but quiet and subtextual ways, about how a lifetime of experiences and abuses and the passions that people have and the experiences that they have, both good and bad, can affect how they see the world and how they act upon the world. And while there's an absurdity to actions taken by several characters, because the movie is textually trying to highlight that these are damaged people, that these are people who think a certain way, that these are people who don't have the, well, if they either lack the adaptability, or they are mentally stuck in some place, or have reached sort of a destination in their internal mental life, where things seem to be concluded, that people continue to like act in the way, like typically in people's lives, they tend to go about things in the way they've always gone about them. Humans are generally creatures of habit, and especially when faced with traumatic, stressful, questionable, confusing situations, the places that people can reach as a result are sometimes very weird, but also very interesting. And I think that's what makes this is not really a character study, but it can sort of come off as one at some points, where you are watching the subtextual internal dialogue or internal monologue of one or several characters, and they may not say anything, but through their acting and through the things that are said around the actual the meaning therein, you learn a lot more about those characters, and you see, if not an arc, at least an expansion of their personality, an expansion of the viewer's understanding of their personality. And I think that's what makes this one so interesting. There are some elements of the characterizations of basically all the characters that I think are a little bit oversimplified, that leave some questions that are, I think, without reasonable means to answer, without like ending up poking holes in the script. But the rest of the thing is so tightly woven that I don't feel the need to jab at it too much. It does lead to certain things being a little bit unsubtle in their presentation, even if they're subtextual. But like overall, it's such a unique production and a unique take on sort of a social awareness black comedy horror film idea, that it's I think it's definitely going to stick with me, if not for being like a really incredible production necessarily, but for being unique and smart and very focused in what it's trying to present. If you have seen this film or are going to see it, or if you watch half of this video and then come back for the second half, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what people think of this film. Yeah, I've been the Social Solipsist. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.